Slovenian Drama. We will speak about Cankar today, and we have some interesting guests with us. Some you know from Slovenia, some are new. So we have also interesting program, I should say. It's not only about telling the world about the translation of Cankar's plays we did recently, but it's also what's already happening around his plays, because this was kind of an issue for Slovenian playwriting and Slovenian culture for many decades. We are still waiting for one guest. I hope he will appear. And I suppose we can just start with the introduction from Andreja Kovač. She is my Slovenian colleague. She lives in Canada now. Please, Andreja, very welcome. Tell us a little bit about the project. The whole discussion tonight will be about.
Hello everyone, lep pozdrav in dober večer vsem. Tatjana, želiš, da govorim v angleščini ali v slovenščini ali oboje?
Po moje se lahko naredimo pozdrav v slovenščini, potem pa moramo kar v angleščini. So we will do the combination sometimes maybe in Slovenian and English, but the major point is of course to present Cankar worldwide and to share this discussion with our colleagues around the world. Yeah, so go on.
Najlepša hvala Tednu slovenske drame in Prešernovemu gledališču v Kranju za podporo temu projektu in seveda za organizacijo današnjega dogodka. Lep pozdrav v Slovenijo iz Kanade. Ta trenutek se nahajam v Mississaugi, kjer sem umetniški vodja gledališča, katerega ime vidite za mano. Pri projektu Cankar gre na zahod oziroma Cankar Goes West sem sodelovala kot vodja projekta in moja naloga danes je, da vam predstavim projekt. So hello, my name is Andreja Kovač. I was the project manager and project lead for Cankar Goes West project, which was a project of translating the plays of Ivan Cankar to English language for the first time. I am otherwise an artistic director of a theater in Canada, located in the 6th largest Canadian city called Mississauga. Our company is called Crane Creations Theatre Company. So Cankar is as important as Shakespeare is for English speakers. For Slovenes, he is literally everywhere. Every single city in Slovenia has one of the streets carrying his name. There are numerous schools around the country that carry his name. Since we start elementary school, we start learning about his plays. And for us, he's also important because he's basically a major contributor to the Slovene national identity. The idea of Slovenes as a nation didn't really exist 200 years ago. It started with artists. It started with poets like Prešeren, and it really came to fruition with Cankar, who was also a politician. He actually ran for a political party in one of the first elections in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, part of which Slovenia as a country was at the time. So he's huge for forming Slovene national identity. As Cankar coming into English, this project has a little bit of an anecdotal background. When I moved to Canada and I was actually looking for a play that I could pitch to a company that works with large ensembles and usually puts on plays from 1850 to 1950 period. And Cankar came to mind, and I was certain that his works are translated into English because I knew that they were translated in more than 15 languages. So I turned to the National Library first, and there was no copy. Then I turned to the Pen Association, and there was no copy. Then I started looking to different publishers, and there was no copy anywhere. Archive, Theatre Museum. Finally, I was talking to Marinka, who's the dramaturg of Prešeren Theatre Kranj, and she was also convinced that there must be translations in English. Well, because we didn't find any, we said, what about if we actually translated the project? So it just so happened that at the time, European Commission had a grant available for translations for smaller European languages into major languages. And we partnered with Prešeren Theatre Kranj to launch this project. The project had translators working on it from various countries. We had translators from USA, from Canada, from Slovenia, because since the very beginning of the project, it was apparent that Cankar's language is very specific. It's about 100 years old now, so it doesn't really work if you completely try to translate it contemporary. But then capturing some of those nuances in English that are very different contextually in Slovene was also a challenge. So we felt we needed to partner Slovene translators, people who know Cankar internally on the project, so that they would be able to provide context. One of the major challenges we had was with some of the most known sentences in Cankar's work. One of his most popular known plays is called Hlapci or Lackeys. And there is a line in that play that is basically characteristics for Slovenes. The line goes something along the line of Slovenes, we are servants or serfs. We are born to serve, raised to serve. And in Slovene, it's called Hlapci, rojeni za hlapčevanje, ustvarjeni za hlapčevanje. And this word and the word play on hlapec and hlapčevanje in English, it doesn't really quite have the same connotation. Because the idea of serving in English-speaking countries is something that has a positive connotation. And in Slovene, it has an extremely negative connotation as a nation that lived under political oppression of various empires for a very long time. So we had to be quite inventive in how we use the words, that they still kept the same meaning behind what they were trying to convey as a message, but also carry that message in English. So this is just a small example of what this project was dealing with on various bases. The way the work was going on was first the translators produced the first draft. Then we read the draft with actors on our team, because we were aware that translating a play means that you're translating a piece of work for theater. So someone will be standing on stage speaking that. It means it needs to be able to flow and be interpreted by an actor. It needs to become a character, not just text on the page. So since the very beginning, we had a team of actors that would be reading a draft, then having their remarks sent back to the translators, as well as both Slovene and English speakers to catch the nuances of where exactly does the language sit. If it needed to be more period, it was more period. If it needed to be more contemporary flowing, that was also considered. And then we produced the second draft. We had our editor involved since the very beginning. His background is both in linguistics and in acting. So we had another layer of oversight that provided both theatrical oversight and linguistic over the project. Finally, we came to the design phase, and our designer Aditi Sharma took inspiration from Cankar's most famous work, A Cup of Coffee, Skodelica Kave, to create these beautiful designs that have a gradation in coffee colors from like very light grayish brown to darker brown tones, alongside with Cankar's portrait on the back of the books. So if you have all the books in the box, they form Cankar's face. And when you open the book, it opens in this bright, bright red, and that represents his political stance. We also decided to include pictures from various theatrical representations of Cankar's work in the books, and that was thanks to a lot of partners. Slovene Theatre Institute and Museum was a great partner of this. So was the Slovene National Drama Theatre in Ljubljana, Slovene National Drama Theatre in Nova Gorica in Maribor, Prešeren Theatre Kranj, Slovensko stalno gledališče Trst, archive in Celje, as well as Cankar's house in Vrhnika. So this was a really huge project that now gives a very, very good overlook of who is Cankar and what is his work. In the book itself, you can also find a pronunciation guide, how to pronounce the names. We kept them original, as well as an essay that describes his work and kind of places it into the context of who he was as a writer and in the context of Slovene theater. Finally, in the end of the book, there is also a timeline of events, both Slovene events and events over the world, that gives someone who doesn't know what is Slovenia, where it is, or who is Cankar, an idea about what is the placement of this playwright and how current he was with various events that were happening around the city and around the world. He was writing about societal change, about national change, about national identity in the time when many, many nations that today we know as nations didn't exist yet. So he truly was a very current author, ahead of his time and very, very contemporary with his thoughts and ideas. That's a small presentation of this project. Thank you, Tatiana, for giving us the opportunity to share it with the rest of the world.
Thank you, Andrea. You are more than welcome, because always when I was traveling around the world and taking with me books from this festival, translations of contemporary plays, I was also looking for translations of Cankar, and this I think we shared when we were talking for the first time around this project and the idea to have this conversation now. Yeah, and what I find interesting, and let us use a little bit of time, when there's discussion about how to make playwriting, there's this conception of working, trying, writing, rewriting the process. And I'm really, yeah, of course we know the language is old-fashioned, and sometimes we even have to translate Cankar to our children. This happened to me, so it comes out from personal experience. Yeah, this must have been a very interesting process, especially all around the translation. So do you find it now, it's my first question for you, do you find it now contemporary, really up to this time we live now, so to connect with the time he was living and the things he was seeing and how contemporary he was, you know, at the time he was living and creating. So what's the connection now? Is this in language?
The connection is huge, not only in language, but in politically as well. I think a lot of the ideas that we're seeing in the world now, a lot of movements for the rights and recognition for very many people, Cankar would connect with in a major way. He would be a champion of those ideas. Also ideas about class. You know, we have many times in his plays this tension between upper class and people who would like to speak up, but they cannot, right? Like Shchuka is a very interesting character, how he still has to bend his head. And I think journalism in that sense is in a very interesting position today that, again, we respond with Cankar a lot. So I think his works have, in the last 10 years, became absolutely on point and speak to the situation in many parts of the world. Like a lot of his character, when Trump was in power, or when we have these leaders around the world that are very autocratic, like Putin right now, those are Cankar's characters. He talks about exactly those guys, you know, what drives them to maintain the greed and continue to pile up their sins. You know, do these sins still sit somewhere in the back of their head? That's basically all around us today.
Thank you. Yeah, this is kind of a look from outside. We often, when we are in the situation now here, we live in this country, we know Cankar from our elementary school already, but this is the view we don't share so often, and it's good now to have this, you know, something to compare with. So Jure Gantar, he's also in Canada now, but he was actually my mentor at the academy. I was really happy to meet him. You know, doing this, it was a nice occasion to reconnect. Jure, tell us a little bit about where you come from, what's your major point of your work, and also reveal a little bit more about Cankar in this historical context.
Thank you. I'm also going to start in Slovenian. I'm just going to say, because I think it would be criminal if I didn't demonstrate I can still speak it. So najlepša hvala za povabilo, Tatjana, še posebej tebi. Nočem povedati, kdaj sva se midva prvič srečala, ker je že tako dolgo časa nazaj, ampak hvala lepa, da se me spomniš. In jaz sem 1 uro bližji Sloveniji, kot je Andreja. Tako da malo hitreje pridem lahko, kadar nazaj hodim. Now I'm going to switch to English, and before I do, I'm not going to do a biographical introduction or anything like that. We can talk about that some other time. I did want to say, because if Tina is on the call, too, if she hears this, I've only had the opportunity before to read her translations from English and Slovenian, and I've written, I think, about a few of them. And I always enjoy them, but I thought this was particularly well translated, and I was mightily impressed. So congratulations! And I've forgotten to say earlier, Marinka, if you're on the call too, I haven't seen you in years. I'm great to at least be able to talk to you indirectly. So I'm just going to go straight.
They are here. They are here. The translator and Marinka are both here.
So I've written a set text so I don't go out of hand, because I'm a professor. So if you give me 8 minutes, I'll take 18 at least. So if you see me looking at an odd way, it's because I'm actually looking at the screen reading. So when Andreja first asked me if I was interested in participating in this discussion, and she explained the nature of the whole project, what struck me most was her description of Canadian actors' response to Cankar. They apparently found him resembling Chekhov. Now, I've lived in Canada for more than 30 years now, and I've never thought of how I'd describe his work to contemporary Canadian, for instance, to one of my students. And the project made me think, how would I define Cankar for an English-speaking audience? I have in my library several English translations of Slovenian works, and I've even directed years ago one of Vili Ravnjak's plays in English translation for a Canadian stage. But I've never written or even analyzed a Slovenian play in a scholarly context, in English, I should say. The only time when I tried to introduce a Slovenian classic to an educated native English speaker, I showed someone a translation of one of Prešeren's sonnets. I think it was a translation by Janko Laurin, if I remember correctly. I was a bit surprised, because instead of an immediate recognition of Prešeren's genius and an affirmation that he could be legitimately compared to his near contemporaries Byron or Wordsworth, I was told very politely, but without a great enthusiasm, that the poem was quite romantic, and that clearly wasn't intended as a compliment, but rather as an assessment of the poem's excess of emotion. I don't remember which one I showed, it was a long time ago. So how could I avoid this kind of a cultural shock and prepare an English reader to appreciate Cankar's plays with the respect we all think in Slovenia that they deserve? Or more precisely, how would I give my students a sense of who Cankar was as a playwright? Now, the Crane Creations Theatre Company's website on Cankar's translations describes him as, I'm quoting now, undiscovered Eastern European Ibsen. His plays have also been compared to a number of Russian authors. I've mentioned Chekhov before, Gorky, Tolstoy, Gogol, although Gogol, of course, is Ukrainian, we should mention that, to Gerhard Hauptmann, for instance. His Hanneles Himmelfahrt, or in English it's called, translated as The Ascension of Little Hannele, is often cited as a direct inspiration for Cankar's beautiful Vida, to Maurice Maeterlinck, and even to Oscar Wilde. Cankar was familiar with and directly influenced by several of these authors, but by no means did he read the texts or see the productions by everyone on this list. So in addition to this, his drama is stylistically elusive. His early plays are realistic or perhaps even naturalistic, but his later ones have been called lyrical and symbolist. So how then would my Aristotelian definition of Cankar look? According to Crane Creations website blurb, the genus proximum, or the closest peer to Cankar, is Ibsen, and the differentia specifica is Eastern European. That is to say, Cankar is like Ibsen, but he is Eastern European at the nation of definition. So I try to get my own version, and in order to get the most accurate and reliable result, I decided to do something almost in Slovenia. I'll probably be disowned right now by any relative of mine. I decided to read a play by Cankar in English translation rather than in Slovenian original. Just cover your ears. Andreja sent to everyone participating in this discussion Tina's and Tom Priestley's translation of Lepa Vida, or as they entitled Beautiful Vida. I was hoping that reading this translation would be destabilizing enough to enable me to see the author from a new angle and give me a culturally less conditioned perspective on his position in literary history. You've heard earlier how important Cankar is. Well, I went to high school named after him. So I read the first act of the play, and I was immediately convinced that the English version of Beautiful Vida has very little to do with Ibsen, even with his late plays such as The Lady from the Sea or The Master Builder. So, to be fair, most Slovenian critics, most notably Rosanda Sajko, agree that Ibsen's influence on Cankar is strongest in his first three plays, especially probably in Jakob Ruda, and much less pronounced in his last four. But even keeping this in mind, I still couldn't shake the impression that the translation, at least, with its distinct rhythms and diction, and also with its plotline and characters, is much closer to plays by another author. But I wasn't sure that this impression isn't simply the result of my subconscious attempt to distance my own reading from traditional interpretations. So I decided to conduct, you'll be impressed, a highly scientific experiment. I often include on my exams a passage from a play that the students haven't read, and I ask them to try to guess its author based on what they learned in the class. Now, our second term exams only start next week, so I couldn't use my students as guinea pigs. Instead, I found the next best test subject, my younger daughter. She had previously taken a course in modern drama. She's not that young anymore, obviously, and has a pretty good understanding of the era and its main figures. So I asked her, she speaks Slovenian, but she's a native English speaker. So I asked her to read the translation and tell me which other play it resembles. So she read Beautiful Vida, and I should add that she loved the play and that she wondered why I never mentioned it to her before. I'm a neglectful father, of course. And then she told me that the play reminded her of August Strindberg's Ghost Sonata. And that is exactly the play I had in mind before I asked her to read that. I thought, my God, that sounds just like Ghost Sonata. So now I know that the proof that consists of two readers agreeing on a single point is clearly far from decisive. My daughter may have come to the same conclusion because she is my child and she shares my genes, or perhaps because I successfully brainwashed her, and not because there is a demonstrable connection between a Slovenian and a Swedish playwright born 27 years apart. But the more I thought about the possibility, the more I convinced myself that Cankar himself, and not just his last play, is far closer to Strindberg than to Ibsen. In Slovenian criticism, the Ghost Sonata is usually invoked in connection with Slavko Grum and his dogodek in mesto Gogi, or event in the town of Goga, rather than with Cankar. Now, for one, Grum knew Strindberg's work and was directly influenced by it. On the other hand, it's quite likely that Cankar couldn't have known Strindberg's play. He may have known some, but not this one, because it was written just 4 years before Beautiful Vida. And Max Reinhardt's famous production that established the play in the world's repertoires was only staged in 1916. That is 5 years after Beautiful Vida. Yet the two plays echo with very similar cadences, engender comparable sensibilities, and reside in parallel spiritual grounds. The implied stage design in Beautiful Vida is definitely not as obviously related to Strindberg as in Grum's play, but it too depends on an urban location that constricts the character's real and figurative movements. What is even more fascinating than an arbitrary series of morphological similarities, however, is that the career arcs of Strindberg and Cankar seem to follow each other. They both started as realists and naturalists and then transitioned to a unique manifestation of symbolism that verges in its extremes on expressionism. They both struggled with addiction, spent their formative years abroad, and experienced a personal inferno which resulted in their spiritual awakening. They, of course, also both had highly problematic relationship with women in their lives, with the Protestant Strindberg being able to divorce his 3 wives and the Catholic Cankar never actually marrying any of his lovers. Even their precarious interactions with their countries could be perhaps compared with both Strindberg and Cankar returning and then dying in their ungrateful homelands. Unlike the relationship with Ibsen, whose influence on Cankar is direct and verifiable, Cankar's affiliation with Strindberg is, of course, mostly a matter of belonging to the same zeitgeist. It could best be described with a biological term as convergent evolution. That is, this is, I'm quoting now, the appearance of the same or very similar feature of culture in different places due to their independent invention, end of quote. There is no direct connection between them, though both feed their growth from similar influences and may even start from related psychological foundations. Cankar's beautiful Vida is perhaps not a chamber play in the same sense as Strindberg's late texts, but it still exists in a modernist abstraction of everyday reality. So I'll conclude now with an attempt of defining Cankar from an English-speaking audience that improves on, of course, all existing ones, modestly. So Cankar is like Strindberg, but he offers a glimmer of hope in his depiction of despair.
This was really great, thank you. Like in old days, Jure. It was really great to hear. Yes, also what you revealed, you already tested the territory with small quotes out of Cankar's plays before they were translated with your students. That's really nice. So what do you think now when we have this volume of translations? What could happen?
I'd love to see the play performed. Andreja and I actually had discussions. I'm hoping that she will pitch one of the plays to our theater, because we have, as a department, we run a season of plays and we bring in external directors, not just student directors. So I'm hoping, we've had, for instance, years ago, we performed Nenad Prokic's Inferno, directed, and we brought in a Serbian director to direct it. And Nenad actually came and visited, students loved him. So I hope that we can do that. Is in North America, in Canada, for instance, there are maybe 3 theaters other than Andreja's who will regularly perform plays in translation. Hardly everything that's written but that's performed is plays that were originally written in English. But universities can depart from that, and often working conditions are very good. Theaters are good. There's money involved, and so on. So I hope I'll get to see it. If I can watch it without crying, that will be a different matter altogether.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. But the books are probably in your library already, or
that I don't know. I can ask. I can check. I didn't even think of checking that. Yeah.
Please check, and we will send them. It's different to read in PDF. It's better to have books. Yeah. And this is okay. So now we connect to Vijay. Welcome, Vijay. Welcome, and hello to India. Please give us a little introduction, short introduction of yourself. And then what we will discuss is what Vijay found out from reading beautiful Vida. Please.
I'd rather talk about the play and not myself.
Just a little bit, so we know who you are. Just a little bit.
I think all present have already received a profile of mine. And I think that should do. I'll just add that I'm one of the founder trustees of Bangalore Little Theatre, but currently completely out of all management responsibilities. I'm just a trustee emeritus, which means that I don't have to attend meetings unless there's something interesting as tea and snacks. So that should do, really. I'd rather not talk about myself. Now, first of all, many thanks for having me over and to join this very, extremely well-conceived event. It's for me an opportunity to learn about Ivan Cankar, and through that a bit about Slovenian drama. These are subjects that I'm coming across for the first time. My comments are in the nature of first impressions. The things that make an immediate impact, but they're not comments out of deep study or research. It's really my first encounter with Slovenian drama and Cankar. First and foremost, first of all, I have to say something about the extraordinary quality of the translation. The translated text is so beautiful to read. It's a delight. It's an admirable project. The entire project of translation all these plays, and although I've just read one play now, it made me want to read the other plays in the project. We have here a monthly community reading evening. It's called the Play Day Sunday. It's once a month. Completely unrehearsed readings of lesser known texts and lesser known authors. I would like very much to have this group read Cankar with your permission. I feel more people should get to know his plays. Particularly useful were the notes accompanying the play text, the history, the social and political context, the timeline, the biographical notes. These are very, very useful. I'm so glad that these were included in the book. It made a lot of difference to one's understanding of text. For me, what stood out was the craft of imagery. Now, unlike here or there, I'm not speaking as a teacher of drama. I'm speaking as a director of drama. And the imagery was extraordinary. The text was constantly creating beautiful and unusual images, and yet leaving a lot to the imagination of the reader. And I just love that craft. It's a bit like, oh yes, and this was a lot like Strindberg. And when I quite agree with you, that you think of Strindberg when you read this. It's like looking out of a window and all you see is a haze and some figures and some shapes, some still figures, some moving figures. They're not clear. It can be frightening at times, and that's really the real quality of such imagery. frightening, and yet it draws you because it's fascinating. It holds your gaze, and you see what you see what you're destined to see. The writer's great ability to tease your perspective, drawing you to tantalizing details, yet sending you back to the whole over the parts. The gestalt, revealing something else each time. This back and forth between the details of the whole is actually a great ability. It's a craft in itself. There's also the writer's great ability to take you into states of emotional turmoil, which are not clearly defined. And that's what makes it beautiful. They're undefined longings. And yet they draw the reader in all the time. Longing, different kinds of longing as a connecting thread seems to be what holds the play together. So by about 3/4 of the play, you realize that Vida is probably a metaphor. She serves as a metaphor for this human nature of longing. There's more than one reference to the world of suffering. There's that line which has been quoted in the preface as well. The only real source of longing is the essence of life. A very Buddhist influence, by the way. There's a lot of the Buddhist philosophy in this. So it's not at all difficult for an Eastern audience to relate to this. There is a recurring theme of fleeing. Again, beauty is in not defining it fully. Fleeing from what? Fleeing for what? Not to worry about answers. We are all fleeing all the time. Longing and fleeing as complementary forces in life to the dual forces driving us. I've chosen one line as a very beautiful representative line. It's on page 15. Oh, brothers, it is hard. God gave man longing and tricked him out of having. I just found that line terrific. And it's sort of representative of the text. The question that came to my mind more than once through the reading, as a director, I saw challenges of staging a text that is so heavily reliant on images. The images seem far more important than the spoken word. But the images are created through the spoken word. And I thought, I'm very curious to see how this is actually handled by your actors and your team. I'm looking forward to that. Finally, one last point. I hope I'm well within the 8 minutes given to me, Tanya. Finally, the parallel to Rabindranath Tagore cannot be missed. They were contemporaries. Although Cankar had a shorter life, much shorter life, but their productive years were overlapped. Both were exploring form and content that later came to be called modernism. Both were drawing from folk traditions of storytelling and drew on folk folk traditions. Both were poets, but writing drama. So the poetry comes out very strong in the texts. And thus both emphasizing images through the spoken word, and so on. I couldn't help thinking that this might be a good topic for a comparative study for any student of drama. Let me stop here. And thank you once again for giving me this opportunity to get to know a great theater artist of this part of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vijay. This was nice overview from your side of the world and of out from your philosophy and how you feel the world and playwriting and art. It's such a great introduction to what will follow in the second half of this event. But do you think in this tradition of yours that you have of storytelling, which is quite, we talk more about this lately since COVID times, also in other parts of the world, storytelling became kind of new topic in playwriting and theater. Where is the most important point you can find, because in Cankar's writing, because this beautiful Vida, in a way, it is a story from our folk tradition. It is poetic. It is bringing images. It's somehow how to understand the layers behind the text, which is in front of us. Of course, good language, and in this case, really good translation helps an artist, a director, or an actor to bring these images up. So, where is the most important point in this text you can find in connection with maybe your tradition? Is there like a light that connects with something that you bring from your cultural?
Yes and no. No, I hadn't thought of it in those terms. And yes, I think the young student who grows up, so to speak, and finds his own life, I think that sort of stands out in the narration. You don't expect that at the start of the play, but the younger fellow, he arrives. Yeah.
Okay.
But all of this is from a first reading.
Mm-hmm.
I have to confess, it's from a first reading, their first impressions.
Okay, so let's compose something together, some stage reading, and maybe stream it with the audience here one day. Would be very interesting.
I'll write to Andreja separately for permission to do a reading. Without ticketing. It's a community participatory reading evening.
Okay. So now we move to K in UK. Andreja, I didn't see your hand.
I just wanted to make a note. I find it so wonderful, Vijay, that you're bringing out the young student. And it made me think about the fact that India has a really young population. Average age in India is much younger than what it would be either in Canada or in Europe, and how that fact stood out for you and connected. It's just, it opens up a completely new perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, thank you. So now we go to Kay. Welcome, Kay.
Hi.
You are based in London in a Little Lion Theatre, and you did something even before we discussed staging or stage reading of Cankar's plays. Tell us a little bit about who you are, about the company maybe, in some words, and then what was the project about. And while you will talk, maybe I can share some photos from what you were doing.
Yes, that'd be lovely. And thank you so much for having me here today. This has been just so wonderful to listen to everybody's involvement in this project and their reactions to the play. So I am actually a Canadian who is a theatre maker, director based in London. I'm the artistic director of Little Lion Theatre Company, which is a company dedicated to bringing Canadian plays to audiences in the UK. So before we did the stage reading, we actually just come off the end of doing a short play festival where we brought 15, 20-minute plays from emerging Canadian playwrights to London. We worked with over 40 different creatives, both in Canada and here in the UK. And we showcased them at a pub theater over a weekend in November. And it was just so wonderfully received to have stories from our home that represents just the multiculturalism of Canada with artists from all over the world, because London is such an international hub. And just that beautiful sort of like community that wasn't just specific to one place, but really for all of us. So what was wonderful about doing Beautiful Vida was we were able to take collaborators from that project directly into the read. So we had actors from the UK, we had actors from Japan, Denmark, the US, Canada. We had an actor from Toronto, which was lovely. We had actors from Italy, like everywhere. It was so wonderful. And yeah, for this play in particular, the reason we sort of chose it, because we are a fringe theater company. So logistically, working in that sort of small scale theater, it was the cast size at first. We're like, okay, we think this is a good group. We can do this in a fringe space easily. But then the second reason is I'm always very attracted to folk stories and fairy tales, because we, as storytellers, we've always been storytellers. These are stories that go back like ages and ages, and they connect us to who we are and the communities that we come from. So when I saw in sort of the brief that this is what this was based on, it really drew me to it. This is my first experience with Cankar. So it was the process then of sort of finding our way into a folk story that I don't actually have a connection to was a bit of an interesting one. So we did actually look, I did my research and actually found the poem by Prešeren. And we ended up using that as an opening for the stage read to give context to the audience, as well as for the actors to really set the tone for what this play was about. Yeah, so that was definitely something that was interesting, because there wasn't a lot of research in English for me to kind of latch onto. So I had to really dig around on the web and try to find ways to get into this play. And I think that's what made it very exciting. Whereas if I was looking at Chekhov or Ibsen or Shakespeare, that is a path that is so well tread for English speakers. So I think there was something very interesting in diving into a playwright that has a rich history, but not as deep a connection to the English speaking world. So I was very excited about that. In terms of sort of looking at the play, I think a friend of mine described it beautifully. She said, it's a very beautiful metaphor for the process of dying. And I know Vida we kind of see her as life. But I think for us, it was sort of this afterlife and this better life that these characters are constantly longing for. And coming out of the pandemic, where we were very much surrounded by death in a very intimate way, and that longing for something beyond what our world was presently in, I think that's something else that really drew me thematically to what the play was. And then on top of that, the interesting thing about then directing a play that is such a, as BJ was saying, there's so much metaphor and imagery in it. It's then how do you take metaphor and imagery and then make it active for the actor? Because you can't really act a metaphor. So we had to kind of dig in and started understanding what the relationships and the story was underneath the play itself. We had a lot of fun with that, especially with Act 2, with Dalinar and Melina coming up with their character biographies and what happened to them before they met in that moment. And we really, really leaned into also sort of the genre of melodrama. And I think that gave a beautiful sort of peaks and valleys to the emotional score of the play as well. Yeah. I think we're going to share some of our photos here. Yes. Wonderful. So these are some of our rehearsal photos that we did. We were rehearsing at a few different venues in London. This is Theatre Delhi, which is a great space over by Liverpool Street Station. And so for the staging of it itself too, we really wanted to focus on the words because it's such a rich text that we had all the actors on stage, but we sort of had on the sides like a waiting area. So if you weren't active in the scene, you would be on the stools on the sides. And then the center was like our active sort of playing space. We tried to kind of mimic a little bit of what Cankar wrote in his stage directions and having sort of the levels in the sugar factory in the house. But the actual performance space itself was just a black box theater, which we had the music stands and the chairs. But the main part of this is we wanted just clarity of the text. So simple blocking, simple movements, and a very much a emphasis on what the language of the play was. Another thing that we did that I thought was really well utilized was I went through different Slovenian folk songs, and we used that also kind of to underscore the play, just to give it a little bit of some emotional scoring, which I thought was really great with the stage reading, because you are, again, sitting on chairs reading from a music stand. So it kind of helped lift all the scenes and helped us sort of enter that world, that heightened stakes. Yeah, this is some of our actors here. This is a space as well. This is actually the Drayton Arms Theatre. We do a lot of work here. So they gave us space to do some of the rehearsals in. And yeah, that's sort of all I have, to be quite honest, Tatiana, if you have any questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it nostalgic to look at those photos, for instance, would be a good question.
Oh, it really is. Yeah, it was such a wonderful project. And I think because we went into rehearsals immediately after the play festival. So the group of people that we had in the room, we had already like a month to a month and a half of sort of building a creative relationship with them. So to dive into this play, there was a lot of trust already amongst all of us. And I was really, really grateful for just the ability of my actors to say yes and really dig into what the story was. They brought so much of themselves. Part of my process too as a director is I like to do blind casting. I believe it's the energy of the performer that helps really heighten a role. So when we were going through it, I was trying to find the spirit of the actor to play the part rather than trying to cast as written on page. And we got a beautiful, as a result, we had such a beautifully diverse cast.
Yes, I will stop sharing maybe now. Yeah, another question for you, Kate. So, we were dealing kind of for decades with Cankar ourselves. Maybe in the wider scope of the region, it was known because we had a lot of performances that were, touring around on the festivals and so on, but we haven't had the real echo from other cultures, which we are trying to get now. You know, and okay, we see now the photos, and later we will see Andrea's company actors do the short stage reading. But what would you say? What does this diversity of people you have in your company that were working on this text, you know, what did that bring, by your opinion? What is the added value to this kind of research you did? You know, another angle of looking at it, building up new metaphors and new images.
What I love about collaborating with artists from all over the world is I think it reminds us that the human experience is universal. So it doesn't matter what country you come from. At the end of the day, how we exist in this world will always sort of transcend borders. And so having this cast speaking in English translation from the first time, coming from everywhere, really does show the universality of Cankar as a playwright, because we were all able to connect to something in that play, even though this is the first time in over 100 years, next to that, he's ever been able to be in English. I've been really fortunate since moving over to the UK. I studied actually in Moscow for a little bit at GITIS. I've worked in Serbia as an assistant director on a R&D. So I've been able to also travel in my practice. And at the end of the day, it's who we are as people, how we connect to each other as people. It doesn't matter the language we use, that exists regardless.
Yes, it's interesting how things, you know, get new meaning and get new contemporary meaning 100 years later. And now we move to Andreja. Yeah, Vijay. Vijay has a question, please.
Just out of curiosity, how many sessions did you have with your team working on this play?
We had about 4 rehearsals. We pretty much did it was the weekend, we did the short play festival, and within a week we did the showing, the stage read. So we finished and then jumped straight into a rehearsal process. So we did a total of, I think, about 15 hours. And then the day before we showed, we did a whole session where we brought all the units together. Just due to logistics and scheduling, we had to kind of do act. And we pieced it all together the day before the read, had a run through, and we showed it at night. So.
Okay. So let's move to Andreja. Short introduction of your work now on this stage reading we will present. So what was going on a few days before the event?
Zoom is always so difficult when you have people in the space. We were kind of between whether we should have people in the space and you guys are watching, and that turns out pretty terrible usually. So each of the actors is in a different room in here, but they'll all be in their own window reading. We also decided to focus on the text because, as both Kay and Vijay have mentioned, if you're staging this play with full staging, you have to figure out how that imagery comes through visual as well. But for the purpose of reading, the imagery lives so richly in the words and the characters of who these people are. To me, it's almost like it's the character is in the absence of what is unsaid, what is between the line of that longing who they want to be or they wish they were. That is where the interesting happens for the piece. So 3 actors from our team are going to be reading today. Rishabh Kalra will be reading for Dolinar. Eugenia De Jong will be reading for Vida, and Amy Paulin will be reading for Milena. We chose to make an excerpt kind of going out of Milena's scene towards the beginning of Vida's scene, because this is kind of the 2 women and the life and death that he's trapped between, that this would be a good representative moment for the play as well. So I'm going to pass it on to the actors.
Okay, so we turn off our microphones and cameras.
Shall we start?
Yes, we just disappear and then you can start, of course.
Child of light, light from heaven.
I loathe shadows, decay, silence, sadness, sighs. Isn't it most beautiful to suck in with one's eyes, mouth, one's entire body, the light that is so much in this world that one can never drink it up? Cannot drink it up? There is light everywhere, nothing but living life wherever I look. Or is it that my eyes are made that way? I am amazed and frightened when I see a man pale in the face, staring at the ground, as if spring were walking across the country with a goblet full of sweet treats and people were looking away angrily. Leave me. I don't like it. Give me the wormwood. And yet sometimes I think, what is behind that black curtain with so many people sighing behind it? And I wished I could draw it open gently, very gently, just to see and run away. Now I have looked and I have seen. God have mercy, nothing but old age and sickness and death. If that's the entire sweetness of longing, heavens, don't give it to me.
It was given to me in abundance and beyond.
How sweetly you have sighed. This drink is too strong for you as well. You have emptied your cup, and there you are, weak and sick. Do not resent me or think that I have come to insult you. You know all too well that my words are like the wind. A man grabs his hat and goes on, paying no heed. You do the same. Give me your hand. Don't get upset and say that you dreamt it.
You are here now. I won't let you go until you understand everything and forgive everything.
What else is there for me to understand and forgive? I understood everything. You said it yourself. And where is that sin to be pardoned? You did not hide from me because of sin. You were ill. It's not sin to be ashamed of your illness. Sometimes I thought I could hear you. Your thoughts were knocking on my window.
Every night, Milena.
Because they were used to it. Do you remember how we sometimes guessed the time right up to the hour, right up to the minute? We worked it out so our thoughts met halfway so wonderfully.
You guessed the word I would use to greet you from far away.
You guessed the blouse I would wear and what flower I would have in my hair.
Everything is like a far off ancient warm light, extinguished forever, like last spring, like a youth that was and never will be, never again, never again.
When is the wedding?
Stay. Look, you came to see a sick man, heal him. You came to see a friend, give him your hand, cast him a faithful look.
Here, my friend. Take my hand and my faithful look.
Milena! Milena!
Stop calling her. She'll be back tonight.
Vida, I dreamt I saw my youth.
You found it. Cling to it. Hold it tight. Don't ever let it go. Trust me. Spare me. Behold, my eyes are pure and happy. There are hardly any tears on my cheeks. And the cheeks were no longer hopeful, no longer pale. Behold, it is only because of you that my heart is still sad. But soon, tonight, it will shout and sing. You poor, tired thing. The amount of your suffering because of me. You poor thing. Don't think anymore. Brush your forehead gently. Look cheerful and say that it was a bleak and difficult dream.
Say it was a dream? Yes, it was. Vida, aren't you the way you used to be? Am I not the way I used to be? What happened between morning and evening to make time split for a year and render a long time ago what was barely the present? Vida, you are looking at me quietly and detached, as if from beyond life. If I didn't love you, I'd be afraid of you.
Tonight, you will realize that it was a bleak and difficult dream, and you will tremble at the memory. No sooner did you see the spring sun than your eyes were happier. Your cheeks that used to be so pale were warmer. You only dreamt for one night, that beautiful night. And no sooner did you love me than there was suffering in your heart. There was sickness in your eyes. Oh, you poor thing. You child of the sun and spring. How sad I felt for you. Where did you go? Where did you get lost? But now, think about it. The dream is no more. It is a happy morning filled with light and song. And that night, it was never me. It was a fairy tale born of fever, imagined in sickness. Or it was a shadow slipping across the path. A man stops, looks around bashfully, and then goes on singing.
Oh, Vida, where are you? Where did you get lost on me? Where did you escape without saying goodbye? I am standing before you, but it seems to me that you are far beyond the sea, high up beyond the stars. I can see your face. I could feel your hands. I hear your words. So you are in front of me in my house, in this room, but it feels as if I had seen that face many years ago, in a far off, distant place, and I can scarcely remember it. And it feels as if I heard your voice either in my dreams or in my childhood. I no longer know the words, barely a melody. Tell me that you are still with me. Give me a happy word. Look at me cheerfully, smile. And if your love equals suffering, give me the full measure of suffering.
Oh, darling, how could you go on a journey with me when this journey never ends? I long to see what life in the sun was like. It is light and joy, a fairy tale and a paradise. But the sun shone too brightly on me. My heart was made sad by a happy song, sad from the longing that knows neither where to nor where from. Oh, so sad that I cried. I shed tears all night long, a hot and bleak night, all that long, bright day. Paradise is not my home. The path is my home. If my heart were longing, if my heart were not longing, that heart would die. Even in paradise itself, it would die. How could you be with me? Where would you go with me? You, child of spring and paradise, my kiss would turn your lips pale. My embrace would make your heart ache.
To die, Vida, in your embrace.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. Even though we are not in the theater, you had a nice applause. Thank you so much, actors. It was a great job. Really. Even for me, I heard it text first time in English. It was just, yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Andreja, for helping us to have this experience, really. So maybe a question for one of the actors, you decide who wants to answer. Maybe ladies, maybe Amy or Eugenia, how did you find the text?
Can start anyway. If Eugenia, if you have any other thoughts, feel free to jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, thank you everyone for sharing all of your thoughts and stuff before the reading. It was also very nice to hear as well. We were, waiting and preparing. Like everyone has mentioned, the very flowery, imagery language is very difficult to bring off the page. It makes, especially on Zoom, but that's part of the fun, I think, figuring out, like Kay was describing, what's their relationship and what's happening, how to make it active, and how to, use those words to create those images in a way that makes sense for both of those characters in that scene. I think it's a very fun challenge, and it's so beautifully written that it feels very easy to, the lines flow very beautifully. So it's interesting to find moments to use that, and then find moments to go against that as the character, and to explore how that can be used from an acting point of view to get that across as well.
We also find many times even in this short excerpt, there were sentences so familiar. This was so interesting to hear them in another language and in your interpretation. Thank you very much. So now we have a little bit of time. We said if there's any questions on our YouTube. Andrea, did you check maybe?
I don't see any questions at the moment.
Okay, so let's just be creative in those last 15 minutes and have some conversation. For sure, you have some questions for to share between yourself, or you maybe have a thought or two to share with all of us. So what was what appeared during this last hour of our conversation? Who wants to start? Okay. I will call you. Yeah, why not? Yeah. Maybe to compare what you guys were doing in your theater with what you've just heard now for the end of this event, the live interpretation of the text.
Yeah, like that scene, I love that scene so much because it's so melodramatic. And I think when we were approaching it in rehearsal, I told my actors, I'm like, just go for it. Like, the images are big, these characters are big. Why not? If it's too big, we'll scale back. But in letting themselves fully commit and go there were moments in it that were actually hilarious, because that's kind of, I think Milena comes out and she's laughing, right? And it's that thing. It's like, we kind of have to laugh in life. We kind of have to laugh in these absurd moments, because Dolinar's kind of sitting there and he's sick. He's obsessed. Like, we were taking it as an obsession with death, and Milena kind of represented life. And so she comes in and she's just laughing at this ridiculous obsession he has with this Vida and this, and he's so caught up that he's forgetting everything kind of in the present. And so I think it's just moments like that. Go for it. Just go for it. Because you find just this richness and in the text and in the imagery that helps just pop, right? So well done, guys. Well done.
Thank you. So Jure, challenging question for you now. Could you imagine 30 years ago to discuss about Cankar this way?
Probably not. I mean, it's, the world changes, so it's a little more obvious, and you see certain things, but it's what from my point of view, what's lovely to hear is how the melody of Cankar has been kept. I think that the deliberate choice to go archaic in some of the choices maintains that, because I'm thinking, I grew up with Cankar. We all had to know certain things and be able to do that, but to do that in English translation, and English is in many respects less flexible than Slovenian, because the word stresses don't change, so it can't, for instance, imitate rhythms other than iambic. So, I mean, again, I'm so impressed with the translation. It's so hard for, you know, for Canadian audience to get their head around that. So actors, fabulous job. I thought, my God, you nailed it. I do hope, Andreja, that you'll have a chance to do it. I'd love to see that. I was trying to figure out which of Cankar's plays would be the best fit for Canadian audiences, and I can't decide between Lepa Vida or I think that the translation in your version is Depravity in St. Florian's Valley. I think that one might work very well because usually audiences would like to see some humor. And art is a big issue, but I mean, see, I don't think that, for instance, Chlapci would work. The lackeys would probably be harder to do from my point of view. I'd love to see it done properly. So please let me know if you do it. But again, kudos to translation.
There's a chance to come to the festival if you do it, so do it.
Vida says here, another Vida, director of the festival, there's a chance for you to come to the festival if you stage Cankar or any other Slovenian playwright. So it's a break for some commercial or promotion of our playwriting. Yes. Yeah, we have a translator here. Do you want to ask her something, or maybe yes? I think she should take a few minutes to replace me here in this chair and talk to the audience worldwide. I think this lady really deserved this.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you so much for all the kind words and all the praise of my translation. I feel deeply honored and humbled to hear Cankar in my translation, but I have to point out it's not only a translation of mine, because I worked closely with Tom Priestley, who was the language editor, and it was a beautiful collaboration, and I'm really, really grateful for this experience. Also, I should say a word of thanks to James Hyatt, whom we also worked closely together and revised the text, and it was really enjoyable, challenging, of course, but to hear it now, like in all continents of the world, as you can, well, you don't know me, but you can perhaps guess from my voice and my well, my emotional impact here, that I'm really, really flattered and so happy to be part of this project. Yeah, I was amazed that, or maybe not, that Case Theatre Company had chosen to do a stage reading of beautiful Vida, because it presumably does travel the best in translation, because it is a poetic play, symbolist play. Well, you've described it yourselves, but for other plays that are more political and that are so much more embedded in the Cankar's background in terms of politics, in terms of political struggle, political parties in Slovenia at the time, it could probably be, well, like Jure said, another uphill struggle. You know, and we kept some of the notes, footnotes, but you know, how do you stage footnotes now? Well, in post-dramatic theater, yes, maybe you can. But for the audiences who would encounter Cankar for the first time, a completely unknown playwright from an unknown part of the world, probably for most Canadian, North American, Indian audiences, yes, that would perhaps be a different kind of experience for them. As for my translation, I might add some notes that I actually tried to be faithful as you can as you can be to the source text. So I didn't consider it to be my mission to bring Cankar to, let's say, contemporary audiences in such a way as to appropriate or maybe make it sound more contemporary. I mean, it is always some kind of a projection, what is contemporary and who is your intended target audience. But I thought since the translations are to be read as well, not only to be staged, and they have been beautifully presented in books, this should leave enough scope and range then for practitioners, for theater makers, to work with if they feel like, you know, some expressions are too archaic, or they may be too ornate or contrived. So myself and Tom Priestley, we actually decided that this would be the way to do it. I have a feeling that some other translators' strategies may have been slightly different. So if you ever have time to read all 7 translations, Michael Biggins's Rowley Grouse, who translated the Private in St. Florian's Valley, you may come across some different approaches as well. But this is also an intriguing and challenging part of translation practice and theory and translation studies. I should also at this point, since I mentioned Rowley, convey his best regards. He was meant to be here today. We were meant to come here together, but unfortunately it didn't work out. But for me, I mean, it has been really a most gratifying and rewarding experience to see you all and to hear Cankar's beautiful words in my translation. Thank you so much. Thank you for your input, and I really hope that something will come up, and in the future we might hear and see more of Cankar on stages in English-speaking communities. All the best, and hope to see you.
I'll just jump in, Yura, to what you said before about the language, because when we were translating, when we were in the 3rd draft, I literally had one copy of the English translation on one side open of the screen and the Slovene original open on the other half of the screen. The actors would be reading. They can tell you how this looked like. And I would literally very quickly, simultaneously look at both of the parts and stop at every point where like a comma or a punctuation was not matching. So every single, because Cankar uses punctuation in a very liberal way. So our editor was a little bit upset with that, because sometimes he has like full stops, sometimes he has 3 full stops, sometimes he has 4, and he's like, what does this mean? And as a director, of course, you take punctuations almost as a score. It's a very big difference between 6 punctuations, 6 full stops, and 3 or 2 or 4 of them. So I was religious about where all the commas are supposed to be, what is the punctuation of the sentence, and what are the words missing in the order of it. I know we went through that. Amy is nodding there. Like, it would take hours to get through it and be like, no, that's the rhythm, the way how it needs to come out. Yeah, so that was a huge part of it.
But can I add that it makes such a difference? Like the difference from, I was lucky to be sort of a small part of reading throughout the time that it took to go through all these drafts, and it's amazing the change that happens when you do start to add that detail in as well. It goes from, you know, just being words to all of a sudden having a life, even from just reading. And it's beautiful to see that happen. And I'm very grateful to have been just a small part of it as well. It was a fantastic thing to see from the outside, seeing it all come together and hearing everybody and seeing all the different translators working on each different play. And it was such a fantastic project to see.
So maybe Jure.
Yeah. I'll just have to, unfortunately, this for the ones of you who will be watching this as recorded, this is actually recorded live, and I have a class right now in 2 minutes. So I don't want to leave my last class of the term. I don't want to leave my students waiting. So I'm just going to say goodbye to everyone. No, I shouldn't say goodbye. See you soon, hopefully. In many cases, it was wonderful to participate. It was lovely to hear it in English. Good luck with the rest of the discussion, and please keep in touch. So thank you.
Thank you, Jure. Thank you very much. Bravo, Jure. Srećno. Okay, so we have Kay. Kay raised her hands.
Yeah, I actually just kind of following off of a little bit what Amy and Andreja were saying about the translation. I've worked with translated texts before, and through studying, I've done drama school, I did my master's all in drama, and this was such an actor-friendly translation. It was so easy to jump into because all of the beats were there, all of like the way the punctuation was placed to indicate character and intention. It was so easy as a director to really start excavating the story of the piece, because it really felt like the idea that this was going to be said by somebody was taken into the translation. And so that made my job so easy because we were able just to all jump into it. Versus I've worked with some Chekhov translations before, and it's very hard to sometimes get yourself into this, but it felt like walking into the most beautiful pool ever. That was the right temperature and you could just dive right in. So kudos to all the translators on that. It was such a joy to work on.
Okay, maybe Vijay, the closing words. Unmute, please. Vijay, please unmute. Okay.
I was saying I was enjoying myself listening to the others, taking it all in. And all the time I was imagining how we would put this on stage. I can't help thinking that way. And I was really thinking of a device which is 200 years old, which is a large pinhole camera. And you lets in through a pinhole the light of the outside world, which you see inside this great big room. And it's all dark and it's black and white, right? So I was thinking of design. I was really thinking of I couldn't help thinking design. And I was really thinking of a black and white design. I was really thinking of an extraordinary designer who would create shadows as if you're in a trapped room. So my mind was racing in that direction. Right.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. An interesting point of view also for us, isn't it? And maybe Andreja, before we say goodbye for now.
Wow, Vijay, I'm really inspired and intrigued by that. You're absolutely right. I can just see it almost like a keyhole that you're peeking into, but it's also peeking into the afterlife. I love, you really got my brain going. It's great. Thank you to you, Tatjana, and to Prešeren Theatre Kranj and to Teden Slovenske Drame for hosting this event and continuously bringing Cankar back on stage. I think the more we spread the word about it, the more it's read, the more we sit in the room and talk about it, we can start to appreciate and unpack all of the layers that he has in his plays. And hopefully the more people will realize that, it will facilitate the production in the future as well. So thank you to you, Tatjana, for being a wonderful host of this too.
I have to be really grateful for all of you to find the time, to be on time. Also to the Prešerenovo gledališče in Kranj, Teden Slovenske Drame in Kranj, then International Playwrights Forum, ITI Worldwide, and Slovenian Center ITI. And I do hope we we will meet on some other occasion, dig into some other play. You know, Zoom seems to be very predictable, but I was really not expecting to have a translator with us tonight. And this was like a top, like a cherry on the cake. Really, really nice. And it made this event complete. Thank you again, also beautiful actors. Be beautiful on stage. Enjoy Cankar's work. And this streaming will stay on YouTube. So please share it also for your colleagues to see it, to think about it. And to, we should know Cankar better. Thank you very much again to everybody. Bye-bye. See you soon.